Hello, I'm Neil McGregor, and this is Germany, Memories of a Nation from BBC Radio 4.
She was thrown out before everybody else. She came over with 250 pots and 250 paintings, and she'd had very bad experiences before she came. It dominated my life. It wasn't talked about, but it was the most important thing about her.
That was Frances Marx, talking about her mother, the ceramic designer Grete Loebenstein Marx, who in 1936 left Germany to settle in England. Like many, Grete Marx left because she was Jewish. But she left also for a very particular reason. Her pottery had been declared politically dangerous. On the 10th of May 1933, just over 3 months after Hitler was appointed German Chancellor, a group of Nazi students, egged on by Joseph Goebbels, Minister for Popular Enlightenment and Propaganda, organised a bonfire of books that were considered un-German. The books included works that were thought to be pacifist, so Erich Maria Remarque's anti-war bestseller, All Quiet on the Western Front, was among them. So were works by Jewish writers, Heinrich Heine, Karl Marx, Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, and even books by Erich Kästner, the author of the children's whodunit, Emil and the Detectives. Erich Kästner was actually present among the crowd, watching his own books burn. The bonfire was held here in the centre of Berlin, in what is now the Bebelplatz, in front of the university library. And similar bonfires of books were held in other university cities across Germany. In the middle of the Bebelplatz today, there is a memorial to this book burning. A large glass plate is set into the cobbles. Through it, far below street level, you can see rows of bookshelves, bare, white and empty, enough to accommodate the roughly 20,000 books that were burnt here that day. The burning of the books was an arresting, unforgettable opening to the Nazi campaign to redefine what was and was not German. The start of a process designed to purify all German culture and to rid the Nazi state of art and literature that was deemed threatening, or to use their word, entartet, degenerate. It began with books and moved rapidly on to paintings, sculpture, and even, as we shall see, ceramics. The burning is an event which lives on in the German memory as a moment of high shame. And beside the memorial, inscribed in bronze, is Heine's famous and prophetic remark of 1821. This was merely a prelude. Where they burn books, they end up burning people too. One of Grete Marx's vases is now in the British Museum, and I'm holding it now. It's a very pleasing thing to hold and to touch. It's about a foot high, and it's in the shape of two swelling, roughly spherical gourds, placed one on top of the other, held together by a handle that is one long applied curve running from top to bottom. The rounded forms flow serenely into each other, and they hint at African pottery shapes, but the cool green glaze and the bold splashes of red-brown are unmistakably oriental. This is the work of somebody who's clearly looked at the ceramic traditions of the world, and from them has created a work of simple subtlety. But, and this is the surprise, has done so using not porcelain, but a robust pottery that can be mass-produced by a factory. This is Bauhaus beauty for a wide public. Grete Marx had trained in 1920 at the Bauhaus School of Design in Weimar, creating good design that could be industrially and therefore cheaply produced. In 1923, she opened her own factory at Marwitz, just north of Berlin, and she was soon acclaimed as one of the leading producers of modern ceramics. Her factory employed over 100 people, and she exported all over the world. As a 1932 magazine put it, you really get your money's worth of good taste. 2 years later, that good taste was under public attack as degenerate. 2 years after that, in 1936, she left Germany.
It was so painful to her. I never asked her about Germany. It was a taboo area. And it took me a long time to get over that, I think.
The Nazi credo famously laid great stress on racial purity, on being Aryan or Nordic, bearing the physical signs that were held to be characteristic of true, full-blooded Germans. As with human beings, so with art. In this brave new Nazi world, ideal art would celebrate ideal beauty. Greek and Roman sculpture focused on strong, athletic bodies scored high, while anything that distorted the human form, abstraction, cubism, was suspect. And if that distortion also used African or other alien models, if the artist had a hint of Bolshevism or Jewishness, then the work was entartet, degenerate, not fit to be shown to the German public. In 1934, Grete Marx was obliged to sell her ceramics factory at a knockdown price to a Nazi-backed owner. And this gave the Nazis the opportunity they wanted to attack her and her work. Pottery like this vase, with its evident debt to Chinese ceramics, its African shapes, its loose splashed glaze suggestive of modernist painting, and the Jewish Grete Marx's links to the Bauhaus, with its deplorable left-wing politics, all this meant that this was never going to be a vase in which a good Nazi arranged flowers. But it is, at least to me, astonishing that Goebbels himself thought that this vase was worth attacking in an article in his propaganda newspaper, Der Angriff, the attack. He claimed that a vase like this, which he illustrated in the article, had lost the simple vernacular beauty that belongs to the German countryside and the German people. And he compared it to other ceramics, noble forms, concluding, two races find different forms for the same purpose. Which is more beautiful? What Goebbels apparently did not realise was that several of these more beautiful, more German forms were actually Grete Marx's own designs, held over from the time when she had owned the factory. The absurdity of the whole exercise of trying to find Jewish and German characteristics in a flower vase could not have been better demonstrated. 3 years later, in 1937, Goebbels organised a pair of huge exhibitions in Munich, designed to demonstrate the difference between degenerate art and German art. Chris Durkin, director of Tate Modern in London, was previously director of the Haus der Kunst, the gallery built in Munich specifically to exhibit the healthy German art.
The Haus der Kunst was a concept by Hitler to show the Aryanness and the ideals of German culture. And so in 1937, in July, they opened the exhibition of great German art. And a day later, the propaganda exhibition, Degenerate art, was opened a couple of 100 meters away from the Haus der Deutsche Kunst. The exhibition at the Hofgarten of Degenerate art was visited by many, many, many more people than the grand exhibition.
The Degenerate art exhibition consisted of works selected to show the debased and distorted anarchy that had destroyed true German beauty. 650 works were deliberately jammed higgledy-piggledy around the exhibition rooms. Klee, Otto Dix, Kandinsky, Chagall, Max Ernst, artists whose works today are seen as central to 20th century European art.
The list of degenerate art objects grew bigger and bigger and bigger over time. In 1937, they counted about 6,000 objects. Shortly after, there was a list of 16,000 objects. And at the end, there was a list of about 21,000 objects. In 1938, the Nazis voted a law saying that the theft of degenerate artworks of public institutions was legally perfectly acceptable.
The Nazi High Command purloined the works of art that they fancied. Goering, for example, selected a Van Gogh and a Cézanne. The rest were either sold to raise cash for the Nazi coffers or destroyed, Around 4,000 of them were burnt by the Berlin Fire Brigade. Even today, Germany's galleries contain surprisingly little great early 20th century art because of what was seized, sold, or destroyed. One example of what was sold in this great purging is in front of me now, here in the British Museum. It's an etching by Emil Nolde, ironically a supporter of the Nazis. And even more ironically, it shows Viking warriors, the most Aryan subject that you could imagine. But the treatment and the style displeased. The Viking warrior is shown as an old man with a paunch who appears to be chatting up two rather loose girls. It had to go. But if you turn the etching over, you can still see on the back the stamp in German Gothic letters of the Lübeck Art Gallery, from which it was removed, like the invalid passport of an exiled citizen, stripped of his statehood. If you visit the Holocaust Memorial here in Berlin, a fate far worse than exile awaited some of the artists of the 1937 Munich show and some of the public who viewed it. The catalogue of the Degenerate art exhibition makes, even today, disturbing, sickening reading. It's only a short guide, but in language that is uniformly violent and shrill, it identified the categories of artistic perversion which required rooting out. Cultural anarchy, Marxist propaganda, pacifist representations of the horrors of war, Jewish Bolshevik distortions, Negroes and South Sea Islanders presented as ideal human types, the choice of idiots, cretins and paralytics as models. Chillingly, as you read it, you realise that while the catalogue is talking about objects, these are also the categories of people whom the Third Reich would soon imprison or eliminate. From works of art to people was a short step. This was merely a prelude. Where they burn books, they end up burning people too. It can be easy in the context of mass crimes to overlook the fact that they're the sum of individual sufferings. So what became of the woman who created this vase, Greta Marx? After she came to England, she worked briefly for the Minton Pottery in Stoke-on-Trent, where she had her own studio. But it seems England was not ready for her Bauhaus-inspired designs, and so she left after only 6 months. Her daughter, Frances Marx, who with her father gave this vase to the British Museum, remembers that the hundreds of pieces of pottery that her mother had brought with her from Germany were never exhibited.
We had a huge Victorian house with church windows, and so the pottery was kept in boxes, something like 20 feet high, and I never saw the pottery until she died, when my father put out a few pieces of pottery. The first time I saw her Bauhaus work, it was a recent exhibition, I was in tears because it was so beautiful, and I realised she was a formidable woman, and she was a woman who wanted to be recognised as an artist, and it was never possible in England, really. And the most painful thing is the not knowing what she was like and not knowing about her past. I wouldn't dare touch it. It was dynamite.
In the next programme, we take the terrifying journey from the destruction of books and of works of art to the destruction of people. To see the objects or the buildings featured in this series and to hear other Radio 4 programmes about Germany, search online for Germany, Memories of a Nation. Memories of a Nation. Memories of a Nation. Memories of a Nation.